Yellowstone is the most famous example of wolf restoration in the world. But before Yellowstone, 8 years before actually, there was another wolf restoration. One that paved the way for Yellowstone to even happen, that proved it was possible to restore large carnivores to the American landscape. And it all happened here on Bulls Island on the Cape Romain National Wildlife Refuge off the coast of South Carolina. But before we head to Bulls Island, I'm here at the Sewee Environmental Learning Center on the mainland of South Carolina. This is one of 49 breeding centers for red wolves in the United States. I mean, just look at them back there. They're so awesome. Because unlike the Yellowstone restoration, which had to do with gray wolves, Canis lupus, they're probably what you think of when you visualize a wolf. Here in South Carolina and later in North Carolina, wolf restoration centered on the red wolf, Canis rufus. There's a little bit of debate as to whether they're an actual separate species or not, but the Fish and Wildlife Service classifies them that way, as well as the IUCN Red List and a bunch of other people, so that's what I'm going with here. They're smaller than gray wolves, but bigger than coyotes, pretty much right in between. They've got these distinctive long legs and ears, and their coats have this grayish, red, amber, cinnamon kind of color. They're really pretty animals, actually. And red wolves, just like gray wolves, are apex predators. And again, like gray wolves, I hope you're sensing a pattern here, they're beneficial to the ecosystems in which they are present. Let me give you just a few examples. Red wolves prey primarily on white-tailed deer. They usually target weak or sick animals, so they actually lead to overall healthier prey populations. For you hunters out there, red wolves also prey on mesocarnivores like raccoons or possums, which are nest predators of prized game species like quail. So more red wolves means more quail. Raccoons and possums are also nest predators of sea turtles. So red wolves are helping to conserve fellow endangered species as well. They keep coyote populations in check too, because coyotes and red wolves can't share territory, and red wolves are more dominant, so they drive the coyotes out. Basically, they just lead to healthier overall ecosystems and greater biodiversity. It's amazing to me walking through here that this used to be red wolf habitat. I mean, they're not super picky about where they live. They actually used to range across much of the eastern United States, from New York down to Florida and Iowa down to Texas. That area included mountains, woodlands, floodplains, forests, you name it. They were the apex predator in this part of the world, until we almost killed them all. Again, as with gray wolves, red wolves were subject to a horrific predator extermination campaign, turbocharged through vilification, persecution, and government bounty programs. Red wolves were killed in record numbers. There were these familiar refrains of like the big bad wolf, where people just thought wolves were these bloodthirsty, vicious creatures who only wanted to kill or hurt people and livestock. Those things could not be more untrue. Unlike the gray wolf though, which could retreat to the wilds of Canada and Alaska, the red wolves had nowhere else to go, and their population collapsed. By the early 20th century, they could really only be found in a sliver of their former range near the border of Texas and Louisiana. This all started too, like before we actually started to care like about conservation, about like conserving wildlife, plants and animals and stuff. And by the time we did that, like started passing legislation, the Endangered Species Act, there were fewer than 20 red wolves left in the wild. But when we actually got our together, we actually did a really good thing. In 1973, red wolves were listed under the Endangered Species Act. In 1975, Fish and Wildlife went down to Texas and Louisiana and rounded up every single red wolf they could find. They actually captured like 400 individuals, but only 14 of them were determined to be true red wolves. So every single red wolf in existence today is a descendant of those original 14. After that, they were actually declared extinct in the wild in 1980, and a breeding program was approved in 1984. Now, here is where Bulls Island comes back into play, because this wasn't just a breeding program to prevent red wolves from going extinct. It was a breeding program to reintroduce them back into the wild. And in order to implement this type of program, you can't just raise red wolves in zoos. They need a place where they can run around and raise their puppies and have prey to hunt and just act like normal wolves. They need a home, basically, like we all need a home. And Bulls Island was their first home. The first place anywhere in America where a large carnivore was declared extinct in the wild and reintroduced to the landscape. And it all started with Judy and John. Judy and John were first reintroduced here in 1978. They were the ones who proved it was possible for wolves to be restored to landscapes. To Judy and John, they weren't doing anything special, they were just being wolves. But to scientists were like, whoa, they are not just surviving here, they are thriving. Maybe we can do this, maybe we can put wolves back into the wild. And so in 1987, Bulls Island became a breeding site for red wolves. It was never big enough to hold a full population, but it was great for raising and breeding wolves and acclimating them to the wild. Between 1987 and 2005, 26 puppies were born here in preparation for their move to the next location in our story, North Carolina. I mean, I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying right here on Bulls Island, but the story, what I'm telling you, the next part of it takes place in North Carolina. Okay, North Carolina. This is where we move from red wolf breeding to red wolf restoration. And the location chosen for this momentous occasion was the Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge on the Albemarle Peninsula. There's actually another reintroduction effort in the Great Smoky Mountains, but it didn't go so well, so we're just gonna skip it. Alligator River had much more success though. In 1987, 8 red wolves were released there as the first ever restoration of a large carnivore back onto the landscape in the United States. And okay, let's pause here for a moment too, because the Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge is, of course, just some lines on a map. It's about 158,000 acres, but red wolves and wild animals in general don't care about lines on a map. They care about eating and reproducing and surviving, which naturally brings them beyond the borders we have arbitrarily laid out for them. So in reality, there was a 5-county area on the Albemarle Peninsula identified as the red wolf recovery area. And because the wolves would almost certainly venture onto private property, the Fish and Wildlife Service reintroduced them with this special designation called a non-essential experimental population. It's kind of complicated and there's a ton of bureaucratic rules associated with it, but the basic idea here was to give the recovery effort a bit of flexibility. Instead of this rigid set of rules where landowners wouldn't have a lot of leeway with the recovery, which would risk alienating their support, they used this new designation to try a more flexible, collaborative approach. It got really messy, but we'll get to that in a few minutes. For now, let's get back to the restoration effort. Because it was popping off. It was wildly successful. Between 1987 and 2014, 134 red wolves were reintroduced to Alligator River. And by 2007, 130 individual red wolves roamed over 1.3 million acres. I really like this quote by Curtis Carley, the first red wolf recovery coordinator. He said, when we first started working with this wolf, he was 99 miles down a 100-mile road to extinction. We now have him identified and we feel we have him turned around the other way. That's so powerful to me. I mean, here was an animal, partly through government-sponsored killing, that was on its way to extinction. And now, through government-sponsored restoration, the first of its kind, here was an animal well on its way to recovery. Red wolves were doing really well. Their numbers were increasing. They were reproducing in the wild. There was this parallel coyote sterilization effort. The Yellowstone restoration was underway by this time, which took a lot of cues from the red wolf program. Things were looking really bright for the world's most endangered wolf. But then some things started to happen that brought this program crashing back down to earth.
It's so cool walking around out here, knowing that red wolves used to be here, knowing that this was the place where we first reintroduced them back into the wild, where we first brought them back from extinction. To be a part of that, to be in this place is incredible to me. I'm feeling so many things right now, but it's just awesome. It's incredible.
Way back in 1990, a farmer shot a red wolf on his property, which he claimed threatened his livestock. The federal government prosecuted him, and he pled guilty, but there was a lot of lingering resentment among the locals after this time. There was also this question of coyote hunting. Coyotes and red wolves already look kind of similar, but especially at night, it can be really hard to tell the difference. So there were a lot of mistaken red wolf killings during nighttime coyote hunts. In 2013, conservation groups sued to stop this practice and won. Good for red wolves, but the simmering resentment started to boil over. It was around this time that there started to be a lot of misinformation about red wolf recovery. Locals just didn't trust the federal government anymore, and the familiar refrain of the big bad wolf started popping up again. Basically, the same sort of language that led to wolf extermination in the first place. This all starts to snowball. The North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission actually votes in 2015 that red wolves be declared extinct in the wild, and further recovery efforts should be halted, despite the widespread success. I also want to mention here that in 2018, a survey found that a majority of residents in the area favored red wolf restoration, so this was just a loud minority. Eventually, though, things got political. Local politicians, state politicians, and federal politicians from North Carolina all weighed in denouncing the red wolf program. The Fish and Wildlife Service caved to this pressure. They fire the red wolf recovery coordinator, they end the coyote sterilization program, they shrink the restoration area by 90%, and in 2015, they even stop reintroduction efforts altogether. Once again, red wolf populations plummet. 75 wolves died in 3 years. Today, there are once again fewer than 20 individuals in the wild. 30 years of restoration work vanished in an instant. So when it comes to the question of how do we save the world's most endangered wolf, the answer is do what we've already done. The Endangered Species Act works when it is allowed to. For more than 30 years, dedicated teams of scientists and conservationists have studied red wolves. Millions of dollars have been spent on its recovery, and these efforts have been successful. Unfortunately, their efforts were hijacked through misinformation, all too familiar lies about wolves, and political interference. I think the defenders of wildlife sum this up pretty well when they say, quote, "We believe the red wolf is not just an animal of fur and bones, but a sense of place. It is the pine forest in which it dens, the white-tailed deer upon which it feeds, and the night sky into which it howls." Early Fish and Wildlife Service leaders recognized as much, and it's time for them to do so again. If we want to save the world's most endangered wolves, we need to stand up to these threats head on and continue what the effort started here 45 years ago, where we showed the world that indeed we could bring species back from the edge of extinction. Okay, that's everything I have about red wolves. I'm really curious to know your opinion on this one. I know it can be a controversial one, so let me know your thoughts down below. There's a ton of resources in the description also, so you can read up and form your own opinion. As always, if you're looking to learn more about parks, protected areas, and public lands, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving the video a like. I really appreciate it, and it helps me reach more people with these stories. You can follow me on Instagram as well. I post pictures of all my park journeys over there, and I also have a Patreon. I've got a Discord over there. I do behind the scenes videos, AMAs, my wife writes poetry, y'all, and I have a book club. Lots of good stuff over there, so head to patreon.com/nationalparkdiaries to check that out. And thanks for watching. See you later. Goodbye.